it's me, Remy the Comic Book Poser, and I'm here to give you some news and welcome you into the Poserverse.
What's news to you? It ain't news to me. What's news to you? What's news to you? It ain't news to me.
Alright, so I have four things that I want to talk about in terms of some news. And this is everything that broke up until Monday morning on June the 8th. So the first thing is all about Funkos. I know that there are a lot of folks out there who don't just collect comic books, but you probably collect Funkos or any Funko merchandise associated with series you like, characters you like, television shows you like, movies you like. As you can see behind me, I have a massive row of pops of all kinds of characters that I'm into. And then in my classroom, I've got, all kinds of wrestling pops, TV show pops, and then I even have some of those American History series Funko Pops because it's something, right, that's easy, relatively cheap, and consumable for everybody. But Funko announced on June 5th that they are cutting 25% of their staff throughout June by the middle of July. According to Milton Gripe from ICB2, the first quarter of the fiscal year, Pop saw a drop in sales, or Funko saw a drop in sales of 18%. In the second quarter of the fiscal year, which is when, we've seen the largest impact of COVID and businesses shutting down and distribution being halted, and, of comics and all of those other things, when people are not going into stores, or you're seeing a skyrocketing unemployment rate, that people aren't going to buy something, that is this lovely little, character that reminds them of a hobby or a series or something that they may not be able to financially be able to afford the consumption of. Gripe also notes that these cuts are permanent, so they announced in April that there were people being furloughed, but unlike some of those furlough positions which were temporary, these are permanent reductions in staffing, right? That these are 250 positions that will not be reintroduced into Funko's business model or staffing model until at all, unless there's a massive turnaround in the market. The number 250 comes from the Seattle Times business staff, and they also made note that they weren't just cutting people from the bottom, that there were a lot of folks from two of the signature Funko retail stores that are going to lose their jobs, and those stores may very well go away so they can focus more on an online presence, or distributing Funko exclusives through all of the different retailers that they work with. But you also see that Funko is willing to reduce the salaries of their top management by 20% through at least the end of June. So it's this isn't like you see, massive corporations declare bankruptcy, and then all of a sudden it's all of the factory workers and the lowest rungs of the food chain are losing their jobs, losing out on like retirement plans or pensions, while the upper echelons of the corporate food chain, reap massive bonuses, or shareholders get a massive amount of money. So, it's sad to see this kind of loss of jobs and whatnot, but at least they are making cuts across the board, that people at every rung of the ladder are feeling the strain of the business. And I think once the economy continues to see some kind of growth or turnaround, then Funko will be something that I bet we see some growth in. I'm betting that they lose a lot of money, or have to find ways to repurpose a lot of the convention exclusive pops and other merchandise that get created, right? Since people aren't either physically couldn't go to conventions, or once cons become a thing again, that people are probably going to be terrified to try and, get in large groups in some instances, right? That you will have a lot more hesitation of people trying to go through, these massive experiences of people because we're all afraid of like wave 2 COVID or potential wave 3 of COVID down the road. So I know this isn't 100% comic related, but I know that there are a lot of us who consume both comics, and then, you know, pops are the new action figure that we all consume and keep in boxes, and there are even case protectors and people that grade Funko Pops now. So this was something that at least I saw, you know, that was kind of an interesting twist from the typical kind of series specific, television specific news that we see a lot. The second kind of layer that we've seen people talk about is the conjunction of the comic book universe and what is happening in terms of all of these protests of, you know, for Black Lives Matter, of officer-involved shootings, of, you know, all of these tragic incidents that we are seeing happening around the United States, and really awesome waves of solidarity that you're seeing around the world. That there are amazing videos coming from, you know, literally countries all over the world to kind of show solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and, you know, protests against police brutality in the United States. So one of the things that was blowing up on Twitter late last week was you would see some uniformed officers around the United States wearing some kind of patch that is the Punisher skull. And people all over Twitter were doing what Twitter does best, their detective work in identifying who these officers are, and, you know, why the use of the Punisher skull is especially problematic in a world where people are peacefully protesting, and then you're seeing either instances of the police agitating violence in some cities, or you are seeing outsiders like come in and co-opt a peaceful movement to, you know, create some kind of full-scale chaos. So as this news was circulating around, you know, the internet, Jerry Conway, who is the creator of the Punisher, tweeted that he is creating a fundraising project for Black Lives Matter to reclaim the Punisher symbol. So these are two elements of tweets that I picked up from Noah Dominguez of CBR. Conway says that, "I'm looking for young comic book artists of color who would like to participate in a small fundraising project for BLM to reclaim the Punisher skull as a symbol of justice rather than lawless police oppression." And then, you know, in a secondary tweet, he says, "What it must not be is a symbol of oppression. I want to deny police the use of the symbol by claiming it for BLM. Call it irony." And I think there's, you know, a lot of weird juxtapositions happening in terms of individuals who are donning the Punisher skull that are law enforcement officers, right? That the Punisher is operating extrajudicially because he feels like there are failures in the criminal justice system, in this, you know, the security kind of safety net or infrastructure, that he has to operate using extrajudicial means. And by no means is the Punisher a celebrated character all over the place, right? That not just there are fans who kind of critique the glorification of violence that comes from Punisher books, but he's not well received, you know, when the Punisher interacts with a lot of other characters throughout superhero stories, right? In Zdarsky's run of Daredevil, it's fascinating watching, you know, Daredevil and the Punisher operate because they are philosophically different in terms of, you know, what their ends of justice is, or what lines they are or are not willing to cross. Or, you know, in one of the books that I reviewed early quarantine was the Captain America Punisher series from the early 90s, where again you see the same kind of conflict of a proper law and order Captain America shutting down the means of destruction that, you know, Castle uses to make sure that justice is achieved. But there's not a lot of agreement or not universal agreement amongst people who have written or worked with the Punisher character in terms of the symbolism of the skull, or whether or not they object to the use of the skull. So in another series of quotations to CBR, and this comes from an article written by Samuel Gelman. Garth Ennis, who, is probably my favorite, author of The Punisher, especially in the Punisher Max books, he either intentionally is vague, or it's frustrating that, Garth Ennis kind of wants to sit on both sides of the fence on this issue as to whether or not the police should be able to use the Punisher skull. So in the quote to CBR, he says that he's a gunfighter rather than a superhero, and being one step closer to the real world as a result, he's just the character you want when you're exploring the nastier side of human existence. So I don't know with that quotation if Ennis is making the argument that, the clash between law enforcement officers and protesters is looking at some of this evil underbelly, or if Ennis is kind of making the claim that the officers who are donning the Punisher skull are part of that nastier side of human existence. And that, becomes kind of frustrating because you're seeing a lot of people put pressure on creators, on corporations to take an open public stance and put their money where their mouth is in terms of, dealing with the anti-Black legal system, dealing with the criminal justice system that disproportionately impacts people of color around the United States, and, kind of focusing on the notion that Black Lives Matter in this moment. So that becomes problematic. But the final layer of this, kind of confusing story is that Twitter is putting a lot of pressure on Disney to sue police forces that are using the Punisher skull as a violation of either their copyrights or trademarks of that symbol. And, the tweet that kind of sticks out to me the most is Eric Palacky's tweet that Disney sued a daycare because there were unlicensed drawings of characters in a mural in a daycare. So why can't they go after the police departments or the military forces or anybody that is using the Punisher skull without a, explicit licensure by Marvel or their parent company in Disney? And there was an article that came out mid today. I'm filming this on Sunday night. That kind of talked about why Disney probably won't flex their muscle or use their copyright lawyers to go after these law enforcement officers. And it's something that just doesn't make any sense to me, right? If you're gonna go after small level copyright infringements, Disney and Marvel are probably in the right position to be able to take this public stand about the reappropriation of what the Punisher skull means. And even if they're not, don't have the ability to go full, litigation on this issue, there should at least be massive public statements, from Business Daddy of Marvel, to be able to talk about why it's probably kind of screwed up that the individuals who are supposed to be the last line of defense or the keepers of the peace are the ones donning a symbol that, kind of acknowledges violence as the potential answer to anything that is perceived as a threat, which is the exact wrong answer we want to, or, image that needs to be conveyed at this moment, to kind of ease the tensions between the police force and, protesters all over, not just the United States, but the world. And you're seeing some small victories happen here or there, like Minneapolis has the city of Minneapolis has taken some steps to defund elements of their police force, or there's been a divorce between the public school system and the use of Minneapolis police as like law enforcement officers or school resource officers. So you're seeing small victories, but what we need are the loudest voices to be able to aid in creating systemic change in the messed up elements that arise in our policing system. The third story is a good transition away from this, because you want to talk about a corporate entity or a production entity in the comic book universe who is taking the right action to deal with this. It's Black Mask Studios. So a story that kind of worked out across a couple of days is that Collier Jennings first reported on CBR, and I saw a lot of these tweets pop up on Twitter because I follow Kwanzaa Oseyefo, who is the writer or the creator of the comic Black, which came from Black Mask Studios. That Oseyefo tweeted out that they are creating a web store to purchase a lot or to sell t-shirts that don a lot of the cover art or iconography that is used in the Black comic book to create donations to legal defense funds, all of the different organizations that are seeking financial assistance during this era. So Oseyefo tweets this out, that the store that they have created, which I think is like blackthebook.com, the support becomes kind of massive, right? That as a lot of people are kind of not just giving money, but also wanting to pursue, symbolism of a rejection of some of this, over the top militarized policing. I think it's kind of awesome that you are seeing someone who writes a book about, the way Black bodies are perceived as superheroes, or if they were to have special powers, and how white systems of power can co-opt those bodies. I think it's awesome to see that kind of performative argument from the book is actualized by the creator in real life by making their profits available to help protesters. Black Mask, the producer or the publishing house overall, then tweeted out that they would reciprocate what Oseyefo is doing with the Black merchandise store. And they have said that they are going to donate 100% of profits for sales of Black, Cal Exit, the two Black AF books, which are spin-offs from Black, and Young Terrorists, to some of these retail funds. And I think the awesome thing is that's, purchases that we could make from the Black Mask website, or it's from wholesalers, it's from your LCS buying those books, that they would give 100% of the profits to those. Eventually, as there were some people who were kind of tweeting or asking Black Mask for clarifying questions, they sent out another tweet later in the day on June 2nd about how, aside from the titles that they mentioned in the first tweet, all of the Black AF, Cal Exit, and Young Terrorists, that any of their books that are sold will receive 50% of profits to those legal defense funds. So I think that that's something that's, pretty cool, and a reason why I'm always willing to support Black Mask Studios, because they are just doing the right things with their profits in the name of furthering a, progressive social justice-based agenda. Here's the last one of the day. Everybody seems to have their own opinion on the split between DC and Diamond distributors in terms of the breaking up of the monopoly that DC and their corporate overlord of, I think it's AT&T, when Diamond initially shut down distribution, they said, well, we're going to create our own satellite companies, and then through some negotiations they said, well, we'll distribute through Diamond and our new satellite companies that we've created. And it seemed that there was some kind of brokered peace during this period of time. But when the news broke at the end of this last week that DC and Diamond were splitting, both DC and Diamond instantly produced press releases that pointed the blame or pointed the finger at the other party. And what becomes very interesting to look at is how local shops that only order through Diamond would be impacted. The moment that, people started, potentially celebrating a ding dong, the witch is dead style moment with the end of, or, the first shot fired at Diamond's monopolization of comic distribution, my immediate question was, how does this impact me, right? If you look at how DC carved up their territory through these two different satellite distributors, the Midwest was someone who was kind of chunked into different territories that didn't make any sense. And you heard me talk about some books that I was missing when distribution resumed, because people who were getting their DC books through Diamond versus through Luna and the other company were coming out at different times. So there were some books that I was getting weeks behind people. My LCS is, the owner who does all of the ordering, all of the work in the shop. And, Diamond helps offer the convenience to very, very small stores like that, who you have a employee or two employees that are essentially jacks of all trades. So my first reaction was, how does this impact me? How quickly can a shop transition from using Diamond for DC to one of the new distributors? And then you'll see the item on the left is a Facebook post from my LCS that essentially says, for this upcoming week, which is a massive week of books compared to the last 2 or 3 combined, that anything that is ordered through Diamond to this point will be distributed through Diamond, which means you should, in theory, get all of your DC books this week. He then said that he went to, Luna, which is the company who would represent us in Kansas or would cover us in Kansas, and, he's worrying about getting sales kind of set up. The fascinating read to me, the item from on the right side is an open letter from, I believe his name is Chuck, the owner of Mile High Comics, who has like 4 stores around Denver. And he sends out this email that says, we are starting a sale with a 50% off sale with the code DC Sucks. And this letter is kind of a large treatise, not defending Diamond writ large, but talking about how problematic that this could be with this quick of a split without any kind of large transition plan, and the real threat that, a quick pullout of Diamond from, one of the 2 largest producers of comic books in the media, or, the comic book medium, could have on stores all over the United States. And this becomes, something that will kind of be really, really interesting to track, right? That sure, you can celebrate that the monopoly is dead. You can live in fear of, your shops losing out on some books. But here's, I guess, where, some of the good old school laissez-faire capitalists or, competition-based capitalists can, kind of chime in and become a litmus test for the comic industry, right? For the last, 20 to 25 years, Diamond has had, a large stranglehold on comic distribution, and love it or hate it, it's become a model that at least everybody's known that they could adapt to. So in a world where now multiple publishing or distribution companies are created, could something happen where we see more competition, fair prices, better rates to, the corporations, to individual creators, to smaller publishers, to local comic shops, to any direct consumer purchase? Like, that's going to become the thing that's kind of telling of how this will all shift. That, I don't have the hottest take on like, yay, Diamond is dead, and start, getting ding dong, the witch is dead trending. That I think it's a potentially terrifying wait and see approach to see how quickly the two satellite companies of DC can kind of swoop in and save the day. Will we see what kind of reaction Marvel will have to all of this, and then how will this affect, create ripples that may affect, secondary or tertiary publishers who relied on Diamond to get their books in the hands of the stores. That if we see a bidding war, does the monopoly collapse and we see true free market competition? Or do we see DC being the first, into the race with their satellite publishers, now or satellite distributors? Do they create a new monopoly because they have the most ready infrastructure to step in if something were to happen to Diamond, or if there were massive ripple effects? So not a lot of hot takes in terms of individual stories for me. Some of that stuff is interesting, but we're still seeing fluctuations in dates of when everything will be released. People are still kind of moving things around on the calendar to see what life looks like in the new normal. And this is the industry side of stuff is kind of what is starting to kind of interest me more in terms of being able to dive in and look at some things. So, if you enjoy these kinds of takes and, that kind of scraping that I do of the different news sites, let me know in the comments, and I'll keep doing this kind of news. But if you're bored by listening to, a dumber version of Ben Stein give a C- economics lecture, then let me know that too. And, I'll make sure to sprinkle in some sugary story or movie news throughout. But I think this was a fairly heavy week. Not just in terms of looking at how individual creators, fans, and the industry as a whole kind of has responded to the wave of night after night after night after night of protest, but also looking at the potential business shakeup of the industry. But I really am going to kind of be intrigued in looking at how other publishers and, voices in the industry continue to see what they can do to offer, a pedestal or a megaphone for the Black Lives Matter movement, or for creators of color in the space. That I think hopefully there is a moment of great awakening that kind of gets rid of some of the massively, cisgendered, heterosexual, white structures of power to begin to get rid of some of the, these barriers. And while a lot of these publishers did, had these lovely symbolic letters show up on their Twitters and Facebook pages and Snapchats on, last Blackout Tuesday, it's time to see if, the people in the industry were just virtue signaling, or if they're ready to continue to take massive action. Individual creators are willing to do their thing, right? Gail Simone helped orchestrate another kind of auction in terms of creating funds that go directly to organizations affiliated with BLM, or funds or associations that are bailout protester bail funds in cities around the United States. So, we know that a lot of the creators in the community have heart. We know that they are willing to do the right thing when it comes to their intellectual property, their ownership of goods, So when and if will we see major players at the corporate level, at the publisher level, take action on these? So that's my take on this week in comic book news. Pay attention to the video that's coming out tomorrow, where I will do some of the, maybe storyline news, where I give my rankings from last week's books, and then also talk about what I plan on pulling when I get to go to my shop on the happiest of days of New Comic Book Day on Wednesday. So as always, like and subscribe. If you have any feedback on what you see me doing, if you would like me to change some things, I am here for you to do some research, for you to do things that are engaging for you. If not, it's just me being a man that's screaming into the void about comics. So as always, thank you for stopping by, and have a good one.